Ivy smiled, placing a hand on mine, her nails perfectly manicured, tapping lightly against my skin. "I think we should take a break," she purred, her voice laced with a kind of condescension that told me she had rehearsed this moment in her head a dozen times. I looked at her, tilting my head slightly as if considering her words. In truth, I had already seen this coming. The late-night texting, the sudden need for alone time, the way she started treating our relationship like an option rather than a commitment. "If that's what you want," I said simply, my face an unreadable mask. No questions, no pleading. Her smile faltered just for a second. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, like she was waiting for the usual script to play out. Me begging, her playing the role of the conflicted girlfriend who just needed space, but still expected me to orbit around her like a devoted planet. Instead, I stood up, pressing a soft kiss to the top of her head. "Take all the time you need," I murmured. Then I walked away. That night, while Ivy slept soundly in our bed, the bed I bought, in the apartment I paid for, I set my plan in motion. By sunrise, she would wake up to an entirely different reality. The first step was the bank accounts. I had always been the one handling our finances, and Ivy, ever trusting, never really paid attention to the details. A few clicks, a couple of quiet transfers, and suddenly her world was about to shrink. The next step? The apartment. Our lease was in my name. The furniture? All purchased with my money. The car she drove? Also mine. She liked to believe she had control over everything, but really, Ivy had just been living in a house of cards. And I was about to pull the bottom one. At exactly 2:45 a.m. the moving truck arrived. The team I hired worked with surgical precision, clearing out everything from the couch she lounged on to the vanity she loved taking her endless selfies at, until the apartment was nothing but hollow space and echoes. By 4:30 a.m. the only thing left behind was a single chair and a printed note taped to the fridge. When Ivy woke up, she stretched lazily, completely unaware that her world had collapsed overnight. She reached for her phone, expecting the usual flood of notifications, but instead, she was greeted with a single text from me. "Here's all the space you wanted." She sat up, her eyes narrowing as she read the words again, her fingers tightening around the phone. Something was off. Swinging her legs over the bed, she moved toward the bedroom door, still groggy, her feet patting softly against the floor, until she stepped out into the living room, and saw nothing. The apartment was empty. Her smirk vanished. Ivy stood frozen, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing, or rather, what they weren't seeing. The couch where she curled up to scroll through her phone for hours? Gone. The coffee table stacked with magazines she never read? Gone. The mirror by the entrance where she always checked her reflection before heading out? Gone. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she took a few hesitant steps forward, her breath catching in her throat. This had to be some kind of joke. A cruel prank. But as she moved from room to room, each one just as barren as the last, the icy grip of reality tightened around her. The kitchen cabinets? Empty. The fridge, wide open and completely bare save for the single note taped to it. With shaky fingers, she ripped the paper from the door. "Here's all the space you wanted." Her pulse roared in her ears as she read the words over and over, her brain desperately searching for an explanation. Ethan he couldn't just leave like this. He was supposed to be the predictable one, the responsible one, the one who always cleaned up the mess. Her fingers fumbled to unlock her phone. The text was real. Ethan was gone. Panic surged through her veins as she tapped his name, her breath coming faster with each unanswered ring. Voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. Her fingers were trembling now, and the smooth confidence she always carried started to crumble. Her stomach twisted as she opened her banking app, praying for a semblance of control, but the moment the screen loaded, a cold, sickening dread slithered up her spine. The account balance stared back at her, bold and undeniable. $0. No. That wasn't possible. Ethan had always handled their finances, but she still had money, right? Her savings, her credit cards. She scrambled to check her other accounts, her mind racing ahead of her shaking hands. But every login attempt was met with the same gut-wrenching reality. Frozen, locked out, cut off. A strangled noise escaped her throat. This couldn't be happening. Ethan was calm, steady, logical. He couldn't just erase her like this. But the empty apartment, the empty accounts, and the emptiness pressing down on her chest all screamed otherwise. She stumbled back against the kitchen counter, gripping the edge to steady herself. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She had expected Ethan to fight for her, to plead, to wait. She had envisioned herself taking time, exploring her options, deciding on her own terms if she wanted to come back. Not this. Her mind clawed for solutions. She needed answers, support, money. She grabbed her phone again, this time dialing her best friend Lisa. The moment the call connected, she launched into a frantic, breathless tirade. "Lisa, I woke up and everything is gone. Ethan is gone. The apartment is empty. He took everything. My bank accounts are frozen. I can't." Lisa's sigh cut through her panicked rambling. But it wasn't a sigh of sympathy. It was long, drawn out, almost annoyed. "Ivy," Lisa said, her tone sharper than expected. "What did you think was going to happen?" Ivy blinked, stunned. "What? You told him you wanted space," Lisa said matter-of-factly. "And he gave it to you. Completely. What exactly did you expect?" Annie opened her mouth, but no words came. The room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. "Listen," Lisa continued, her voice softer now. "I don't know what you thought Ethan was, but he's not stupid. He's not weak. You underestimated him. Big time." Ivy felt something hot and bitter rise in her throat. "Are you seriously blaming me right now?" Lisa hesitated, then sighed again. "No. But I think you need to understand that you just lost something real. And from the looks of it, for good." A dull ringing filled Ivy's ears. She had called Lisa for comfort, for validation, for someone to fix this. Instead, she was being handed the brutal truth on a silver platter. She ended the call without another word, throwing her phone onto the counter with a sharp clatter. Her breaths were shallow, uneven. For the first time in her life, Ivy had no safety net, no backup plan, no control. And the worst part? Ethan knew exactly what he was doing. He had beaten her at her own game. Ivy sat at the edge of the bare mattress, her fingers digging into the fabric as she tried to steady her thoughts. The weight of what had happened in the last hour pressed down on her chest like a cinder block. The apartment, once filled with warmth and familiarity, was now just an empty shell, a hollowed-out reminder of what she had lost. Her gaze darted around, desperate for something, anything, to anchor her to reality. The walls seemed larger now, the silence unbearable. Every sound, from the hum of the refrigerator to the distant honking of cars outside, felt eerily magnified. This wasn't supposed to happen. She swallowed the lump in her throat and forced herself to think. Damage control, that's what she needed. Ethan had blindsided her, but she could still fix this. He wasn't the type to be cruel, he was reasonable. He had always been the dependable one, the steady one. Maybe if she just talked to him, she could smooth things over. With renewed determination, she grabbed her phone again, scrolling past their last conversation. Her message history was filled with unread texts from him before she had asked for space. He had reached out, tried to communicate, and she had either ignored him or responded with vague, non-committal answers. Now the tables had turned. She typed quickly, "I think I need to talk. Can we meet?" She hit send, her fingers clenching around the phone as she watched the message status. Delivered. Then, after a few agonizing seconds, read. Her breath hitched. He had seen it. That meant something, right? He wouldn't just leave her like this. He would answer. He had to. Seconds stretched into minutes, then longer. No response. Her grip tightened on the phone as frustration boiled over. How could he just ignore her? After everything, he was her Ethan, the same man who once dropped everything to comfort her when she had a bad day, who had rearranged his entire schedule just to accommodate her whims. The realization cut deep. He wasn't that man anymore. Heart-pounding, she called him, straight to voicemail. A frustrated growl escaped her lips as she threw her phone onto the mattress. She refused to believe this was the end. Ethan didn't just disappear. There had to be a way to reach him. Then a thought hit her. His office. Without hesitation, she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the apartment. The taxi ride was a blur, her mind racing with every possible way to win him back. Maybe she could reason with him, make him see that this was all just a misunderstanding. When she arrived at his office building, her stomach twisted. She had been here dozens of times before, always greeted with warm smiles from the receptionists. Today, however, there was an unmistakable shift in the air. She walked up to the front desk, schooling her expression into one of calm confidence. "I'm here to see Ethan," she said smoothly. The receptionist, a young woman Ivy vaguely recognized, gave her a hesitant smile. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Carter isn't available." Ivy blinked, caught off guard by the formal tone. "It's urgent. I just need 5 minutes." The woman shifted in her seat, glancing toward the back offices before turning back to Ivy. "I don't think that's a good idea," Ivy's patience snapped. "Listen, I don't know what he's told you, but I need to speak with my boyfriend. It's personal. For the first time, the receptionist's expression hardened. Ethan asked us not to let you through. The words hit like a slap. Ivy's breath stuttered. What? And he gave explicit instructions. He doesn't want to be contacted. Ivy felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't just Ethan ignoring her. This was Ethan making sure she had no way to reach him. She stumbled back from the desk, her chest tightening. The floor beneath her felt unsteady, the realization crashing down all at once. Ethan wasn't waiting for her. He had already moved on. Ivy walked out of Ethan's office building in a daze, the receptionist's words echoing in her mind. He doesn't want to be contacted. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts as she made her way to the curb, feeling like the world had tilted beneath her feet. She had expected Ethan to be hurt, maybe even angry. But this level of cold finality was something she hadn't anticipated. The Ethan she had known, the Ethan she had controlled, would at least given her the chance to explain. But this Ethan? This Ethan had erased her. Her fingers trembled as she hailed a taxi, sliding into the back seat with numb movements. The driver asked for her destination, and for the first time in years she hesitated. Where was she supposed to go? Just drive, she muttered, pressing her fingers to her temples as a dull ache spread through her skull. She needed to think, to strategize. Her next move had to be careful, calculated. Ethan was methodical. He had always been the type to plan things thoroughly before acting. That meant this wasn't impulsive. He hadn't just reacted to her request for space. No, this was something deeper. This was premeditated. Her chest tightened. How long had he been planning his escape? The thought sent a ripple of nausea through her. Had he been watching her this entire time? Waiting for the perfect moment to turn the tables? Her phone buzzed in her lap, snapping her out of her spiraling thoughts. A message from her bank. Her fingers shook as she opened it. Dear Ms. Monroe, this is a courtesy notification that your credit card has been declined due to insufficient funds. Please contact customer service for further assistance. A cold dread pooled in her stomach. No. She quickly navigated to her banking app, her heart hammering against her ribs. But the moment the screen loaded, the truth became impossible to ignore. All her accounts were empty. Ethan hadn't just left. He had wiped her out completely. A strangled sound escaped her throat. This wasn't just about punishing her emotionally. This was financial warfare. He had made sure she had nothing, no safety net, no backup plan, no power. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Could she fight this? Take legal action? But what would she even argue? The money had always been his. The apartment lease had always been his. For the first time, Ivy felt something unfamiliar creep up her spine. Fear. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Lisa, Ivy, I don't know how else to say this, but you need to stop calling everyone. People are talking. Nobody's on your side in this. I'd suggest you figure things out fast because, Ethan? He's already moved on. Ivy's pulse stilled. Already moved on? Her fingers hovered over the screen, hesitant to type. She wanted to ask what Lisa meant, but a part of her already knew. Ethan was finished with her, and worse, he had made sure everyone else was too. She was alone. Really, truly alone. The taxi pulled up to her apartment, or what used to be her apartment. Ivy stepped out on shaky legs, barely registering the driver's farewell as she walked toward the building. Inside, the emptiness felt suffocating. The silence was loud. She sank onto the bare mattress, staring at the blank ceiling. Ethan had given her exactly what she had asked for, space, and for the first time in her life she had no idea what to do with it. She sat on the bare mattress, her back pressed against the cold wall, her mind cycling through the events of the past 24 hours in a dizzying loop. She had always believed she could control any situation, bend things in her favor, charm her way out of consequences. Not this time. Ethan was gone. Not just physically, but entirely. His presence had been erased from her life with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, cutting her out without hesitation or remorse. The apartment was empty, her bank accounts were frozen, and every call she had made, to friends, acquaintances, even her own family, had been met with either awkward silences or outright dismissal. She thought back to the moment she had told Ethan she needed space. How smug she had felt, watching his composed face, convinced he would wait for her to come back on her own terms. She had underestimated him. A sharp knock on the door startled her. She bolted upright, hope flickering in her chest. Maybe Ethan had changed his mind. Maybe he had come back to talk. She rushed to the door and yanked it open, her heart pounding. But it wasn't Ethan, it was her landlord. "Ivy," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "We need to talk." Her stomach twisted. She already knew what was coming. "I've been patient," he continued, shifting uncomfortably. "But the rent is overdue. And from what I've heard, Ethan's name was the only one on the lease." Ivy swallowed hard. I just need a little time," she stammered, gripping the edge of the door. "I can figure something out." The landlord sighed. "I'm sorry, but you have until the end of the week to vacate. If you need help finding somewhere temporary, there are shelters downtown." Shelters. The word hit her like a punch to the gut. She, Ivy Monroe, who once had a man who worshipped her, who had a lifestyle of comfort and ease, was now being offered information on homeless shelters. The landlord gave her a sympathetic look before turning away, leaving her standing in the doorway, her entire body trembling. She slammed the door shut, pressing her back against it as panic finally overtook her. What was she going to do? She had no money, no home, no one left to turn to. Her pride screamed at her to find a way out, to claw her way back to the life she had before. But deep down, she knew that life was gone. Ethan had made sure of that. Desperation clawed at her throat as she reached for her phone, her fingers hovering over Ethan's name one last time. She had played the game, and she had lost. She typed one final message. "I made a mistake. Let's talk." The message was marked as read within seconds. She held her breath. Then, before her eyes, the screen flashed. Block. Ivy stared at the phone in stunned silence. Ethan wasn't coming back, and for the first time in her life, she understood what it truly meant to be alone.